Hello! Welcome to the second installment of our collaborative classroom at Main Street Theater. I'm Jonathan Gonzalez, the Director of Education and Youth Outreach and Engagement at Main Street Theater. So today we are going to go over the component, the core of what we do in all of our Main Street Theater camps and classes. We emphasize creativity and collaboration, and the creativity part is creating your own characters and stories. Now, in the first video, we talked about character and how to create a character. And in this video, we're going to talk about how to create a story that your characters can live in. Now, before we start, I want to emphasize that there are lots of ways to create this story. I'm going to give you 7 points, but you don't need to just sit down and write it out on paper, although that certainly is a fine way to do it. But ever since we had human beings, we had stories, even before the invention of paper. People would sit around a campfire and tell stories that would get passed on from generation to generation. People would look up at the skies and see patterns and stories and constellations in the stars. And, of course, there were cave paintings. There are many, many ways to tell stories. So feel free to draw your story out, write your story, or even walk around and talk your story into a microphone. There are many ways to create stories, and we have lots of great technology to help you. So now, without further ado, here are the 7 points to creating the bones of a story as used by Main Street Theater's actors. Here we go, creating a story the Main Street Theater way. The first thing to do is to find a spark of an idea. This can be a who or a what, a character. It can be a where, a place, like I'm setting this in the ocean or in a castle. An event, it can be something that happens, a plot like world domination or a tidal wave, or it can be a problem, which is going to be, I'm going to make a story about cheerleaders in conflict or football players or rival robots. Now, to begin the story, every classic fairy tale begins with once upon a time. This is your beginning where you introduce your story and characters. So it's very simple. For this video, we're going to use the 3 little pigs as an example. For once upon a time, there were 3 pigs. Now, establish the world of your character. This is the and everyday part. So, and every day, the status quo of the play, this is how things are. You can also begin to describe the setting where the story takes place. So, for example, every day the pigs hung out in their houses. One house was made of straw, one house was made of sticks, and the third was made of good, strong bricks. Now, your and every day doesn't need to be super exciting. We're just getting into the mindset of the story, where we are, who are the characters, what's the story that you've just thrown us into. Now we're getting to the exciting part, creating the conflict. Until one day, this is the big development that starts the whole story or sets the whole story in motion. But it does have to make sense. We call this the problem at Main Street Theater, and at school you'll call it the conflict of the story. The big bad wolf, obviously, is the big conflict of the 3 little pigs, but conflicts can be all kinds of things. Maybe somebody's lost and you need to find something, or something was stolen, or maybe someone has an internal conflict. They're sad and they don't know why. The conflict is really the thing that really hooks the audience. Now we're going to shape the plot. Because of that, what happens next? So if you've got a really strong conflict, the what happens next should just follow pretty simply. The big bad wolf wants to get those pigs, so he's going to go to the first house made out of straw. And of course, we all know what happens there. Now, you can start dialogue if you like, but I would encourage you to just try these 7 points, and then you can go back and do dialogue. A lot of times we get caught up thinking about, what can I say here? What can I say here? Well, just get your 7 points, or think of them as pearls on a necklace. String your 7 beads together, and then you can go back and add dialogue. But if dialogue is helpful, certainly don't hesitate to use it. Because of that. Now, this is the what happens next after the what happens next. It leads to the big point. Your story should even have more action now as it moves forward. So the wolf blew down the straw house. Now the wolf is going to blow down the house of sticks. Another children's story that uses because of that in a brilliant way is If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, and all the sequels. If you give a mouse a cookie, this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. As audience members, we always like to follow along the story. What happens next? What happens next? And in this 7-point structure, you're just going to have 2 of these because of that. So they should be really strong, and they should really move the action forward. If you're going to introduce a new character, make sure it's important to the story. Here's the climax. Until finally, this is your big finish, the point of no return. In the Three Little Pigs, this is where the big bad wolf fails, and he either tries to go down the chimney and is burnt in the fireplace, or he just gives up and goes to another village, and the pigs are safe. But it's always the big action that happens, the final lightsaber duel, the final battle, the discovery of the lost treasure. This is where, after this, there's really no more because of that. So we're just going to wrap up the story after this. It's the big climax. And from that day on, this is what we call the falling action or the denouement. In fairy tales, we call this, and they all lived happily ever after. So we get to know what life is going to be like after the story ends. From that day on, all the pigs decided to work harder, like their third brother who built the house out of bricks, and they decided not to be so lazy. So it's always just how we wrap up the story from then on. And there you go. You've created in 7 points a story that can become a play. Now, the next steps are making the play even better. How can we make the play better? We call it the 3 Ds of playwriting. Dialogue, of course. So once you've made your 7 points, go back and come up with at least 3 lines of dialogue per point. So you should have at least 21 lines in the play. Once upon a time, there were 3 little pigs. And the first pig goes, "Boy, I'm working really hard on my house of straw." And the second pig says, "And I'm working really hard on my house of sticks." So we've got dialogue going. Or they can just say, "My name is Elmo and I'm a pig." You can just introduce your names too. Or you can just say anything that comes to mind. Do. Now we've talked about this. This is the heart of playwriting. What do the characters do? Don't be so much into adjectives or describing, come up with what they do. This happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. If you're following all 7, then this should be pretty easy to follow what they do. And then describe. Of course, we want to fill in, the 3 houses were made of straw, bricks, and sticks. Like, details are important, but the details don't necessarily have to be about the color of clothes they wore or too many emotions, unless the emotions help us see what they do. You do want descriptions, but it should be described in what they say and do. The playwright Shakespeare was brilliant at this. In Romeo and Juliet, we know it's a hot day because Shakespeare has the characters talking about how hot it is. We don't need to describe it with a set or anything else. That's how good playwriting works. In what the characters say and do, you have the story. And here you see the 7 points of making a play. Adding the 3 Ds will make it richer, but you can pause here and write this down if you want to refer to the 7 points, or make a screenshot, or what you will. Writing the story in your body is super important to make a play work. If you don't want to just sit and write the whole thing out, it's good to get up, move around. You can actually walk as the character that you created from the first video, and then the story comes to you from there. Once upon a time, I was walking around doing this video, and I thought, once upon a time, there was a pair of headphones. Okay, what happens next? And every day the headphones were sad because they could never hear the music that people heard when the headphones were on their head. Until one day the headphones traveled to a robotics doctor. And then all kinds of things can happen after that. The robotics doctor could be a mad scientist, or the long-lost parent of the headphones, or he makes little tiny headphones that the headphones can wear so the headphones can hear the music too. There's all kinds of ways you can create an ending of a story, but I didn't need to know what was going to happen all at once. I just came up with one thought, a pair of headphones, and went tuk, 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 added all 7 points. And of course, there could be lots of fun dialogue. It's fun to think about characters maybe twisting it or flipping it, like a mouse or a rat becoming a chef is the story of Ratatouille, right? We don't always think of rats being helpful in the kitchen. Most chefs want to get the rats out of the kitchen. But in Ratatouille, once upon a time there was a rat who was really good at cooking. So now you've got this great story started off. So when you're coming up with your characters, think of unusual and interesting things that could happen to them in the until one day. Editing is super important, and it's one of the main things we do at Main Street when we're working on plays, because our students have all kinds of great ideas and tons of characters and things that could happen, but there's no story. It doesn't make sense. Why did that happen? Why did that happen? But if we're following our 7 points, adding our dialogue and coming up with what they do, then you might find, oh, maybe I don't need this or that because number 5 doesn't really relate to number 3, or it didn't connect right to number 4. And maybe we don't need that extra character. And if we got rid of that character, we could have this character do that instead. And so now you're making it a nice, smooth, streamlined play where the audience is like, oh, that character, what happened to them? I want to know what happens to that person. Because the more that you have the character in the play, the more we care about them and what happens next. If you have a lot of just random characters show up, we're not going to really care so much because we're like, who's that? Why are they important? But if we stick with a hero and we have a villain or we have a problem, how does the hero work that out? And how does the problem bat up against the hero? That's what we like watching in plays. So now it's your turn. Follow these 7 points, add dialogue, add more things that the characters do, flesh it out, and come up with a 5-minute story with action and dialogue. Next class, we're going to show you how you can actually work on producing this play that you're creating in your very own house. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.